Hi everyone, welcome to Learning Impact. In today's lecture, we will discuss social stratification and we will discuss its four systems that include the slavery system, caste system, estate system, and class system. So let's start. Okay, first the social stratification. We have already studied social stratification in a previous lecture. Today in this lecture, we will just define it. Social stratification is a division of large number of people into layers according to their relative property, power, and prestige. And this is a concept which applies to both nations and to people within a nation, society, or other group. This is a social stratification. Means that it is a system through which we categorize people into different categories. And what are the bases of this categorization? That is a property, power, and prestige. These three bases has been identified by Max Weber, and this concept is applicable to both. Like it may be in the form of a global stratification, like the whole globe has been divided into most industrialized, industrializing, and least industrialized nations. It can apply to both nations and to people within a nation. Like it can apply to particular single society, like Indian caste system or Pakistani class system. This is a process that can be applicable to any group, either it's a form of small or large group. The social stratification concept is applicable. So it's simply a division of society or division of people into different strata. And the basis of this stratification varies. It depends on the culture of that society, but mostly the Max Weber which identify the basis of this stratification that are the property, power, and prestige. Or mostly when we view society, there are differences. In some society they give more value to property and as compared to power, and some societies give more power to prestige than powers. But the extent up to which the social stratification exists in a society vary, but most of the causes are the property, power, and prestige. Okay, social stratification affect our life chances. It means that those who are born into a lower stratum, of course, they have a less access to the healthcare sector and other social services, and in that way, they have the less life expectancy as compared to other. And similarly, social stratification affect the way we think about life. It means that those who are born into a lower stratum, for example, those who belong to the low income families, they mostly think about life in different ways compared to other who are wealthy, because most of the people who are deprived, who don't have any who don't have access to the basic necessities in the form of clothing, clean water, and shelter, what will be their major goals in life? Their major goals in life, that how they view life, that they want to have access to these basic necessities. But on the other hand, those individuals who have been born into rich family, how do they view life? They view life differently, because they have already access to the basic necessities for which the people of the lower stratum they are striving. So they will think more bigger, like they will think of changing the world, they will think of innovations. So in that way we can say that social stratification affect the way we view our life, the way we think about life. Okay, then the degree of social stratification. Social stratification exists in each and every society. There is also a concept of global stratification. The whole globe has been stratified into different strata. When we discuss the degree of social stratification, means we discuss that up to what extent the social stratification exists in a particular society and what kind of system exists in society. So there are two systems, that are the closed and open system. First is the open system. This theory of system was given by the Talcott Parson. And what is open system? Open system is a system, as its name indicates, open means that they have more chances of social mobility. Open system is a system in which boundaries between levels in hierarchies, they are more flexible. And it mostly influenced by the achieved status, because mostly persons they try to have more access to the resources. For this they work hard, they gain more quality education, and in that way they can change their status. So that's why it is known as the open system, because the boundaries between levels in hierarchies, they are more flexible and there are more chances of social mobility by changing their status, by achieving new status, and it assumed to have some degree of social mobility. This is the open system. So for example, we take the class system as an example of open system, in which if individual is born poor, they can work hard and they can change their stratum by having more and more access to resources, getting quality education, and move up within the social stratification. So class system is one of the example of the open system. Then the other system, which is the degree of social stratification, that is the closed system. The closed system is a system in which the boundaries between levels of hierarchies are rigid, as its name indicates, opposite to the open system. So levels of hierarchies, it is rigid, means that social mobility chances are less. An individual who is born in a particular stratum will remain forever in that stratum, whatever they do. So the position mostly determined by the A-scribe status, means that the status which has been entitled to individuals since birth. For example, in case of the Indian caste system, if an individual is born into a particular caste, like for example the Dalit, so they will remain forever in that caste. That is the lowest caste of Indian caste system. Similarly, if individual who is born in Brahman or any other caste, who is one of the upper, which is the upper caste in Indian caste system, so they will, this is a label which will they carry on forever. They can't change it, because it's something that they have born into a particular caste, into a particular family. But if we look at on the other hand, the class system, it can be changed, because it is mostly determined by the economic position. So economic position can be changed, but the label which has attached to a particular strata or particular individuals, they cannot be changed, because it depends on the judgment and perception of society. It's something culturally constructed by the society. Okay, then the systems of social stratification. When we discuss, these are also, we can call this examples of social stratification. We have, there are many examples of social stratification. Some we will discuss in this lecture. These include the slavery system, caste system, state system, and class system. These four are the major systems which we will discuss in this lecture. Okay, first is the slavery system. How can we define slavery? Slavery system is a system in which individual they own other people, means that human on other human. This is the slavery system, and this is a system in which individual enter involuntarily. It doesn't depend on their consent or their will. It is something that they enter into the system because of the circumstances, or because of any because of any other reason, like maybe death, and maybe the war, maybe in case of war, and maybe they had committed a crime. As a compensation of that, they enter into this system. So it is something involuntary. Okay, the slavery system is a system which considers the most extreme form of legalized social inequality. When we look into history, where slavery system practices was very common, we mostly see that at that time this practice was common because it was something officially recognized. It was something legalized officially. That's why it is known as the most extreme form of legalized social inequality, because it is a system which was supported by the government, by the social structures of that time. For example, in case of the Greek city-states, when they were fighting with each other, one city-state, when they conquered the other, they enslaved their people. So it was a system which was common at that time. So it was something recognized. So that's why it is considered legalized social inequality, because it was a common practice at that time. Okay, then the second thing is that slavery was most widespread in agricultural societies and least common among nomads. Nomads were those who moved from one place to another, who are in the form of the hunting and gatherers. So nomads had more other options. For example, if one group they try to dominate the other groups, so they have more options. They mostly move to another place. It was the characteristic which actually made the nomadic society more communist or more egalitarian. But in case of the agricultural society, where there was a concept of ownership, where there was a concept of ownership of property, at that time the slavery concept emerged, because one group they became owners and the other become workers, and it leads to the slavery system, because those who are considered superior, who are wealthy, they actually on the other people who are working on their land. So as a compensation, they were doing them nothing except the daily wages. So that's why in that case the slavery system emerged. So it was most widespread in agricultural societies and least common among nomads. And third is that slavery system is a system in which the owners they actually treat their slaves not as humans. They treat them as property, just as they were household pets or appliances. Means that they treat them inhumanly. They do not give them equal rights. This is the most important characteristic of the slavery system, that it actually dehumanized their slaves. Okay, then there are three causes of slavery. When we witness history, there are three major causes who are the most common causes of slavery that include the debt. First one is the debt, like the creditor when they give loans to the debtors. So those who are unable to repay their debt, the creditor they actually enslave these people. This is one of the most common causes which still exist in developing countries today. And second is the crime, that in most cases, in case of the crime like murder, the victim family they mostly enslave the murderer as a compensation of their loss. And the third was the war. In case of the war, like for example, the Greek city-states and the Romans, when they were fighting with each other, they enslaved the people of the cities which they conquer. So these are the most common causes of slavery. Okay, then the conditions of slavery. We mostly think of slavery system that slaves will be like those people who are living in a miserable condition, and it is a system like something permanent and inheritable, like passed from generation to generation. It is a common image of slavery system, but it is not always the case. There are some instances in history that the slaves were living, slaves were living more quality life, and the condition as we have the image we have about in our mind about the slavery system, it was the some of the rare examples in history we have that the conditions of slavery were far much better than that. The first thing is that in some places slavery was temporary. For example, in case of the Roman slaves, what was the system of the Roman slaves? That the owners they were actually they set a price of the slaves, and the slaves then work hard to set themselves out of slavery by paying the price which has been set by the owner. So it means that at that case slavery was temporary because the slaves were able to set themselves free forever by paying the price which owner has set. And the a second example, like in case of the ancient Mexico, slavery was not necessarily inheritable, because in case of the ancient Mexico, it was a kind of norm that slaves, when they were working in a homes of the wealthy family, most of the cases when they become too much attached, that the wealthy families they sometimes they adopt the slaves, means that they become part of their family and they inherit all the equal rights as the other children of their family. So in that case we can say that slavery is not necessarily inheritable. We have the example of the ancient Mexico where it was not necessarily inheritable. And the second thing, that slaves, it is not necessary that slaves will always be in miserable conditions. Slaves were not always necessarily powerless and poor. For example, if we take the slavery system in a Muslim history, in Islam, when there was the order was given by God that the slaves should be treated humanly and they should be treated equally as other humans. So in that after that the slavery system in Muslim history and was then become far better, and the slaves they were given equal rights, and even that some of the slaves they become head of the state. So we can say that the conditions of slavery is not always as we think of it. There are some rare examples, but remember that these are the examples that are rare in history. Slavery is always in most of the cases slavery is permanent, but these are some rare example where slavery was temporary, where slavery was not necessarily inheritable, and slaves were not necessarily powerless. These are some of the rare examples I have mentioned, which mostly negate the image we have about the conditions of slaves. Okay, then the example of slavery. We can take example of slavery like 2500 years ago, the Greek city-state, they were trying to enslave each other while they conquered each other's cities. And we can take another example like 2000 years ago, Romans, when they become power of the Mediterranean area, they enslaved some of the Greeks they had conquered. And most of the astonishing thing is that Greeks who become slaves of the Romans, they were more educated. So the Romans, they actually learn different subjects from the Greeks, from their slaves. And the third was that slavery still exists in a new world, in a form of the bonded labor, in a form of the illegal migrants, which we will discuss in next slide. Okay. So has slavery ended? Slavery hasn't ended. Although the Universal Declaration of Human Rights had declared slavery as against the human rights, and also they had prohibited slavery in all its form. They had termed slavery as a human rights violation, but still slavery exists. Although its form has been modified, but still it exists in our society. So more people are enslaved today than at any point in world history. We still have the example of the human trafficking. We still have the example of the slavery when we, for example, if we look at the undeveloped countries or the developing countries also who have the bonded labor as a form of slavery. And in developing countries, for example, in case of the Pakistan and India, there are the examples with bonded laborers. And in case of the developed countries, there are illegal migrants and guest workers where slavery still exists. The bonded laborers is a system, is a contractual system in which individual they sell his or her services for a specified period of time. It's a kind of arrangement that is very close to slavery, but the exception is that in case of the bonded laborer, the laborer mostly enter into this system voluntarily. Means that they try to repay their debt, and for that they enter into this system for a defined period of time, and they sell their services. They sell their body, their services for a specified period of time. This is the bonded labor. Mostly in Pakistan, in Indian society, in their rural regions, where there is still the feudalist system, such bonded labor exists, which is a form of slavery. Okay, then the second system is the caste system. Caste system is a system in which status is determined by birth and it is lifelong. It is a caste system. It means that individual who is born into particular stratum, they will be entitled by these labors forever, because it will be the title which they will carry for lifelong. They cannot change. It is a fixed system, which we just discussed. Which is one of the example of the closed system, because it is something determined by birth. So in caste system is mostly characterized by the endogamous marriages, the marriages within a caste. And this is one of the reasons that it become difficult, it become difficult for one caste to get merged into another, so that's why it leads to their fixed boundaries, that they mostly do practices like endogamous marriages, sometimes intradining, means that most of the members of the same caste, they mostly prefer to eat meals together as compared to with other caste. And also that it is one of the example of the closed system where the social mobility is far less, it is most difficult, as the social mobility is low in case of the caste system. And then there is a cumulative inequality. As the caste system, they do endogamous marriages and they pass this title from generation to generation. So it leads to the concentrated poverty, which leads to the cumulative inequality. Means there's something concentrated in a particular region, in a particular family, a particular caste. And then they have also some rules about ritual pollution. Ritual pollution is a kind of, it's a concept that touching an inferior caste, it contaminates the superior caste. So they try to keep the contact between a caste minimum as possible. For example, if Dalit they touch someone of a higher caste, then person become unclean, and even they believe that the shadow of an untouchable they can contaminate, so they view them as untouchables. So there is a concept of the ritual pollution in case of the caste system, because it is more rigid, it is more discriminatory system where the social mobility is less, where the boundaries are fixed, where the practices like the endogamous marriages, the intradining, such kind of practices leads to the more inclusion, more it overcome the chances that this caste system can be erased because of these practices. And also they have a defined occupation for each caste. We will just discuss now the example of the Indian caste system. We will discuss Pakistan caste system and the South African caste system also. So they have a defined occupation for each caste, like each caste has to go for that occupation. They cannot go for other occupation which has been defined for another caste. And it is all depend upon it is all according to a judgment and perception of the people of that society, that how they view it. They have defined it themselves. It is not something just emerge out automatically or simultaneously. It is because that the society, they view certain individuals as inferior, certain other individuals as inferior, and it leads to such caste system which becomes so rigid that they practices like endogamous and other. And sometimes religion also become motivation of this. In case of the Indian caste system, is the Hinduism which actually sometimes promote caste system in these societies. Okay, so examples of the caste system is the Indian caste system, the Pakistan caste system, and the South African caste system. First is the Indian caste system. Indian caste system, this is the whole structure I have drawn for the Indian caste system. That is, the Brahmins is the top of the Indian caste. Brahmins, the occupation which has been defined for them, these are the priests and the karmics, they are mostly classified as Brahmins. The Kshatriyas, the occupation which has been defined for Kshatriyas are the rulers, administrators, and warriors. Then the Vaishyas, for whom the occupations have been defined as artisans, the tradesmen, the farmer, and merchant. Then the Shudras, whose occupations are the manual laborers. And then Dalit, these are untouchable, and the street cleaners. So these are the Indian caste system who have different occupations. And Indian caste system is one of the prominent caste system in the world, that we don't see such caste system as strong, as more prominent in society, in any other society except the Indian. It's more prominent, it has more influence in Indian society. So these are the occupation which has been defined for each stratum. Okay, then the Pakistani caste system. Pakistan caste system has been defined for three major categories, that are the Ashrafs, Ajlaf, and Arzals. Ashrafs, these are some labels which they attach and they use it as a second name, that are the Said, Sheikh, Mirzas, and these are the titles which used by the Ashrafs. Then Ajlafs use these titles like Rajputs, Awans, Jats. We mostly heard about these names. These are the associated with a particular caste. And what are the basis of this caste? Ashrafs are mostly they are mostly considered the people of foreign blood, because these were those Hindus who actually converted from Hinduism to Islam at the time of Muslim rule in India, and then they migrated to Pakistan at in the time of independence. So it means that they are mostly considered the people of foreign blood, because they are the religious who converted from the Hindu upper caste. Remember that these are the people who convert from the Hindu upper caste to Muslims at the time of Muslim rule in India. And then the Ajlavs, these are the second stratum. And in Ajlavs, they are mostly religious converts who are mostly associated with the agriculture activities. And Arzals are those who are the mostly associated with the unskilled work, like the laborer, the butcher, the barbers. These are the Pakistan caste system. For these, the occupations has been defined mostly. For Ajlavs, the occupation associated with agriculture, and for others, the least desirable jobs has been defined for Ajlavs. They include the butchers, the barbers, the factory workers, the laborers, and all other works that have the more importance in Pakistan society, that are considered more desirable, like the military works, like the administrators. All these jobs have been defined for Ashrafs. These are the Pakistani caste system. Then the South Africa caste system. It is on the basis of race. This caste system consists of these four strata. First are the Europeans or the Afrikaners. Afrikaners are those who are white. They are those who are the Europeans, and the descent of the Europeans who are the mostly of the Dutch speakers. And these people, okay, they were mostly descended, including the Dutch and the British settlers. So these were not indigenous to South Africa. They were the settlers who come from outside, and they were mostly those of the European descendants, including the Dutch and the British settlers. And the second was the Asians. These were the descent of the Indian worker who brought in 19th century, and they were mostly the Asians were mostly professionals, like they were involved in a professional work. And then the color, who were the descendant of the mixed races, like those who intermarriages of the Europeans and the Asians, or Europeans or colored people. It leads to this stratum which we call the mixed races, or the descendant of mixed marriages. So these colored people, they're mostly involved in the semi-skilled jobs. Remember, Asians, they were those who were brought to this South Africa because they had skills. So they were just brought in South Africa for work. So they were mostly professionals. They were skillful people. And the color were those who were semi-skilled. And the last was the Africans. African were those who were indigenous to this South Africa. And they were considered of least importance, who were engaged in business, trade, and Africans were those who were engaged in least jobs, which were the unskilled jobs. Okay, they had no stake in business, they were not included in trade, they were mostly unskilled. And the Africans, they were considered most of the rights of the Africans were denied by the Europeans. Europeans who were considered at the top of this stratum, they were mostly denying citizenship. Even they were denying citizenship to the Africans. And this was all the stratum of the South Africa, in which the Europeans, they were at the top, who were acquiring all the most desirable jobs. Means that these were the people who were running the South Africa, the administration, the military, and then the Asians and colors were those who were attaining a job that were of the skill and the semi-skilled professions. And Africans were at the least, at the last of this stratum, last of this classification, in which they were mostly going for the least desirable jobs. For they were the most oppressed, most discriminated stratum of the South Africa. So these are the South Africa caste system, and this caste system was then ended in 1990. In 1994, the apartheid state of the South Africa was then ended, but still, although it's officially has been it has been ended, but still the impact of this South Africa caste system is still prominent in their society. Okay, then the class system. Class system is another example of the social stratification, which based primarily on the position of money or material. It is a class system, means that it depends on how much wealth an individual has. The level of wealth determines their stratum their placement in this social stratification. So money may be in the form of property, but it leads to the class system. Like its economic position determined by the money, by the position of wealth, position of property. This is the class system. The Dennis Gilbert gave the model of the social class, which was then got famous, and it also can be applicable to Pakistani society. Dennis Gilbert uses a model of the social classes, which was based on three elements. That was education, occupation of family head, and the family income. And this is all we can apply to Pakistani society. And then the all types of the social mobility is possible in a class system, because as we just discussed, that class system is example of the open system. So social mobility was more possible. There were more opportunity for people to have movement up in the social stratification. Then the divisions are blurred. Divisions are blurred means that individual, they can change their status by doing more and more hard work and doing more contribution to society by having access to the quality education. So divisions are not as fixed as it is in caste system. It is more blurred. So individuals have the opportunity to change their status. And then labeled to ordinary things, they form the status symbol. What is important in case of the class system is a kind of label that has been attached to ordinary things, which become the status symbol. Like for example, the car which we use, the clothing, the branded clothes we wear. These are the important things which actually use as something by other people to judge one's class system in a society. And based on the ownership and control of resources and type of work that people do. For a class system, an individual must have some kind of ownership, and they must have some kind of work which provide more and more pay and income. In that way, their class will be determined. So this is a class system. Okay, here is example of the Pakistani class system, where there are the upper, middle, and the lower class. Upper class, according to a Pakistani society, the upper class are those who are mostly politicians, judges, and generals, because these are those who have the most high salaries. They are those who have the more control over the resources. Then the middle class are those who are skilled laborers, who are the small businessmen, and who are the teachers. They are classified as the middle class. And the third are the lower class, who are unskilled labor, the carpenter, the sweeper. These are the lower class, because mostly their salary, their income, their position of wealth is low. So that's why they are classified as the lower stratum. This is the upper, middle, and lower class, which can be equally applicable to Indian society also, because in India although the politicians, the judges, these are also, in case of the India, they have the more high and pay. That's why they have the upper class, and also the middle and the lower class. So these are the example of the Pakistani class system. The fourth is the estate system. This is the last example which we'll discuss in this lecture. That is the social stratification example. That is the estate system. In case of the estate system, the social stratification system of the medieval Europe, which consisted of groups on the basis of land ownership. What is the underlying principle for this? That is the ownership of land. That if individual they own land, they will have the placement in a higher stratum, and those who don't own the land, they will place in the lower stratum. This is the major principle, or we can say the underlying cause of this state system. Okay, so a state system is also one of the example of the closed system, and it developed during the Middle Ages in Europe. And the basis of this system is the ownership of land, which is more associated with the feudalism. So a state system emerged in medieval Europe when there was a feudalism. And the feudalism, how can we define it? Feudalism, it is a system of receiving land from a king and in return working and fighting for him. So according to Oxford Dictionary, which define it, that as a result, the commoners, they were working for the king, and what they were receiving in return, they were receiving a small piece of land. This was what we call the feudalism. Okay, now we will discuss the state system, the whole structure of a state system of the medieval Europe. This is the state system of the medieval Europe. In this, at the top, which is the Pope and Church, they were equated to God. They were considered God at that time. Then the king and the nobles, nobles and lords, they were those who had the right to own property. So it means that they were the landowners. Kings were those who need the permission of church to be crowned, and the nobles were those who were wealthy landowners. Only these two stratum had the right to own property. And the clergy and the church, they were the political power of that time. They were collecting taxes from everyone who lived within the boundary of their state. They were owning the vast amount of land, and the king need permission of Pope to be crowned, and nobility were the wealthy families who ruled the land, who ruled the country, and the land was the source of wealth. They were doing no work because they believed that work was something beneath their dignity, something to be done by servants, because they were more wealthy at that time, and they were just administering their land. So the king and nobles, they were at the top of the stratum because they were most of the wealthy families, the wealthy stratum of that time, because of the ownership of land. And then the knights and vassals, what were their responsibilities? They were providing services to the nobles and lords. That were the military and the non-military services which they were providing, and in return what they were getting as a compensation, small pieces of land. Because the knights, vassals, the merchants and peasants had no right to have the ownership of land. It was only the right of nobles, lords and kings at that time, and the church who were owning the lands. So what were the responsibility of these three stratum? They were providing services to the upper stratum, and what they were getting as a result, the small pieces of land. Okay, so knights and vassals were providing military and non-military services to the nobles and lords, and what they were getting as a result, the small pieces of land. So they were mostly providing the services, like they were fighting in battles, wars, and they were acting as a law enforcement officers also. And they were also sometimes they give advices to Lord whenever Lord want advice. So vessels were also used to give the better advices to lords. So these were their responsibilities. And then the land which were given to the knights and vassals, the knights and vassals were then using the merchants, farmers, tradesmen, and craftsmen to serve the knights and vassals, to serve them. And as a result, what they were getting, the land which were provided to knights and vassals, the small portion of that land was then given to the merchants as a result of the services they were providing to knights and vassals. Okay, so this is a kind of system, like nobles were giving land to the vassals were then giving lands to the merchants, and as knights and vassals were providing services to nobles, but the merchants and these were providing services to knights, and the peasants and serfs were then providing services to merchants. As a result, what they were getting the small pieces of land from the merchants, which they themselves had taken from the knights and vassals. So this is a kind of system in which was based on the give and take relation of land. Okay, so what were the responsibility of merchants, farmers, and these people? Merchants were those who were involved in business. Traders were the farmers were those who were mostly preparing the soil for harvesting. Harvestation was not done by the farmers; it was done by the peasant, but they were just preparing the soil. The tradesmen were those who were the sword makers, and the swords were then used by the knights in a wars. And craftsmen were those who were making ordinary things like chairs and tables, which was the basic necessities at that time. Then the peasants and serfs, what were their responsibilities? They were considered at the bottom of the stratum. They had no education. They had no access to education. They were working for long hours. They were using dirty clothes. They were given little land as a compensation of their work. They were the most exploited people of that time. And the peasants and serfs were mostly working on the land which the farmer had just prepared, the soils which farmer had prepared. They were working on that land. So the most little land was occupied by peasants, and the which was given by the merchants and farmers as a result. So in that way, this is the whole system, the state system of the medieval Europe, which was associated with the feudalism and depend on how much an individual or a group they own the land. So this was all about the social stratification is for systems. So this was the end of our lecture. Thank you so much for watching. Leave your questions in the comment section below and like, share and subscribe our channel for latest lectures. Thank you.